What better way to celebrate 100 days of the worst governor in history than to watch her and her party's gerrymandered congressional map start to go down in flames? So that's exactly what we're going to talk about today. That's what happened at the Supreme Court of Virginia when they heard oral arguments Monday about the legality of that gerrymandered map, and it did not go well for the Democrats at all. Let's unpack what happened. In today's video, we're going to discuss what happened when the opposing sides of the gerrymander issue in Virginia finally faced off in front of the Supreme Court of Virginia, or SCOVA, as we like to call them. Which side came off really bad? And that's based off of the number of questions posed to them by the justices. And what comes next? If you're new here, hi, I'm Terry. I'm a fed-up Gen Xer who worked for years behind the scenes in conservative media and decided right now was the time to get out in front of the camera and talk the truth. Welcome to Smart Girl Politics. Okay, I'll be referring to some notes just because I want to make sure that I give you the full story of what happened today. We're not going to go too far into the weeds because there was a lot of General Assembly, election. It got a little crazy. But one important thing to know before we listen to the clips of the arguments is this. Jay Jones, our repugnant current Attorney General of Virginia, he is in charge of presenting the pro-gerrymandering side of the legal battle. But he didn't do that. He didn't present his side's argument today. Oh, no. And instead, he had to rely on outside counsel. And I hear that the outside counsel is so outside they're not even close to being in Virginia. Yes, Jay Jones brought in someone from the liberal utopia of California to argue why Democrats should be allowed to gerrymander Virginia's congressional map. Doesn't that sound great? Par for the course for Jay Jones and Virginia Democrats. Another important thing to know about, and it was determined pretty early in the arguments today, is that last week's yes vote, where this gerrymandered map was approved under very, very questionable circumstances, last week's yes vote is irrelevant to the constitutional matter that is being considered by the Supreme Court of Virginia. Monday's arguments were really about the constitutionality of the process Democrats used to get this gerrymandered map in the form of a very questionably worded ballot in front of voters. So that's a separate matter, and I will get to that in a minute. Now, I listened to the entire thing this morning, and it was limited to 1 hour, blessedly. So they literally cut it off at like 58 minutes. It was an audio-only thing, so you have to use your imaginations when visualizing the various players. Now, I thought I'd give y'all some help, because this is how I was picturing in my mind the pro-gerrymander team. So let me share my screen with you. Remember that guy? If you have a certain age, if you're a fellow Gen Xer, maybe younger, maybe older, you'll remember this guy. It's a Martin Short character from Saturday Night Live when SNL used to kind of be amusing. So that's who I have in my brain when I am listening to the arguments from the pro-gerrymander team. They went first, and they almost immediately ran afoul of at least one or two of the justices who got them to admit that the General Assembly did not, in fact, follow the rules, their own rules, for advancing the referendum. So let's go to that first clip.
You don't disagree that the General Assembly didn't follow the terms of the resolution for expanding. The argument is, as a legal matter under Article 4, Section 7, it's irrelevant that they didn't follow that.
And that principle is firmly rooted in law, in American law, and in this court's cases.
And that's a yes.
That is a yes.
Things got super spicy when Team Gerrymander tried and failed miserably to adequately define what an election is. Clip 2.
Turning to Article 12, Section 1 specifically.
Yes.
Do you agree that the word next and modifying next general election for the House of Delegates means that if the election has started, that's not the one. You have to go to the next one. Your disagreement with the other side is when the election starts.
My disagreement with the other side is the definition of the word election in 5 separate provisions of the Constitution.
If a constitutional amendment is passed by the General Assembly at 5 p.m. on the first Tuesday after the first Monday in November, that can't be the election to which it refers.
So I think that's a much harder case that's not presented here. I think it's probably that wouldn't be valid, but again, that's a very different case here.
You would say doing it on election day itself, anytime before the polls close, might be valid?
I think probably not. The point I'm just trying to make here is that that's not the case that we have here. The case that we have here is the General Assembly passed the proposed amendment before the election, where the term election is defined in the Constitution by 5 separate provisions as a single day that takes place in November. So Article 2, Section 6 defines the election as the November general election. That is an election that takes place in November, not over a 3-month period.
What we have here is a lot of weasel words from the Democrats. The heart of the matter here is that early voting for the general election had been well underway last fall when Virginia Democrats in the General Assembly decided to cram in redistricting as part of that election. At this point, when they did that, late October of 2025, less than a week before the general election, and over 1 million Virginians had voted at that point, casting their ballots, not knowing that gerrymandering was going to be decided in part in that election. That's the heart of this matter. Here's another way that you can look at it, because it is a complicated issue and it's many, many levels. But here's another way to look at it. This user over on X says, counsel for the Democrats just admitted to the Virginia Supreme Court that early voting en masse risks the will of the voters being compromised as things develop throughout the election process. And that's exactly right. This is how I have thoughts over on X. Here's how I looked at that. I said the Dem side is pretty much making the argument for why early voting should not be a thing. It pretty much blew up. I heard from a couple butthurt liberals about it, but for the most part, people were like, yeah, that's what I took away from it, is that this early voting should not be a thing, because as we talk about all the time, when the Democrats can't win by the rules, they change the rules, and that's exactly what they did here. One of the justices then asked a key question, which Team Gerrymander avoided answering. Surprise, surprise. This is the question. Do you think that it is at all anomalous to tell somebody that when they went and voted for a member of the House of Delegates, up or down, cast their vote, that they were not actively participating in the election when they cast their ballot? This is what is at the heart of the matter. I want to fast forward to when Team Freedom, Team Virginia, aka anti-gerrymandering team, was making their argument that the General Assembly trampled all over the Virginia state constitution to get that lobster map approved. Their counsel told the story of a Democrat voter who voted early, not knowing that gerrymandering was going to be brought up, then came to regret her decision when her side pushed the gerrymandering late into election season. Let's hear a little bit about that.
And say Camilla Simon, one of the plaintiffs in this case. She is a regular Democratic voter. She is in support of nonpartisan gerrymandering, like 2/3 of the Commonwealth. She voted early in the 2025 general for her delegate, Rodney Willett. After that, in the waning days of the election, it was Mr. Willett that introduced this new proposed amendment. And she was very unhappy about this. She wished she could redo her vote, but she couldn't. She was denied the opportunity. She, like a million or more other people, voted before this proposed amendment was ever even proposed. None of these voters had any idea this was coming. And that's not how the process is supposed to work. Because as I mentioned before, it's the people of the Commonwealth, the voters, who possess the power to amend or modify the Constitution. And denying them the knowledge that this proposed amendment is coming through should undermine the whole process.
Boom! To replay a little bit of that, it's the people of the Commonwealth, the voters who possess the power to amend or modify the Constitution. And denying them the knowledge that this proposed amendment is coming through should undermine the whole process. It's a reminder, that's pro-Virginia team saying why this was done illegally and unconstitutionally. Now, because it is complicated, I wanted to share this screen from a delegate who represents a very red part of Virginia, Ren Williams, and I think he put it extremely well. So we'll just go over what he said, because it kind of is a really good summing up of what happened today. Dems argue Election Day is a single day and doesn't include early voting in order to try to circumvent their unconstitutional maneuvers. At the SCOVA hearing, it sounds like we're on solid ground. Justices didn't like that early voting had started prior to the first passage of the amendment by the General Assembly. Also made it clear that what happened last Tuesday has no bearing on the case before them today. Virginia Constitution requires an intervening election between the first passage of the bill by the General Assembly and the second passage of the constitutional amendment language by the General Assembly. The funny part is Dems are now arguing that November 2025 was the intervening election. They argue Election Day is only on the first Tuesday in November, and early voting doesn't count as part of the election count. Make this up. The Dems need early voting to be a single day now, not 45 days as they pushed for forever, for this to work. If it's a single day, then it doesn't matter that early voting started before the Dems passed the amendment in the General Assembly the first time, because they did it before the election. If Election Day is not a single day and the first day of early voting is the beginning of the intervening election, then the General Assembly did not pass the amendment language before the intervening election. The election had already started and millions of votes had been cast by then in late October. We'll wait and see what the court says. I'm sure they won't delay very long in their ruling. So that's basically the crux of it. It was all about the process that the Democrats used, and unsurprisingly, they changed the rules, they ignored the rules, they trampled on the rules, and all just to try and dupe their way into making this happen. Now, what's going to happen next? That's the most important thing. Where do we go from here? Now, if you don't follow Virginia Project and you're interested in what's happening in Virginia, that's an account that you want to be following. To help clear up any confusion, here's the current redistricting status. Certification is still enjoined, which means they cannot certify the results from last week. SCOVA is expected to rule on today's case in 2 to 4 weeks. Ken Cuccinelli, and I will link to the video that I did with him last week, Ken Cuccinelli thought by mid-May that this might be decided. I've heard some other speculation that it could be maybe next week because there are other elections, an election year for Congress, which is what this is all about. There are some time limits on that they might rush this. Now, one interesting thing I think that Ken Cuccinelli pointed out, who, as I'll remind you, he predicted could be a 7-0 ruling against the Democrats on this. He felt like he would have wanted to hear a little bit more from more justices. I believe 3 justices asked questions on Monday. He wanted to hear a little bit more, but from what he heard, he felt pretty positive about it. All right, that was just a quick wrap up for you today, and that's all I've got from right here in the formerly free Commonwealth of Virginia. If you found this video helpful, please hit the subscribe button and drop me a comment down there in the comment area and let me know what you think about today's hearings, what you think's going to happen. It's hard to think that a court decision is going to go our way, but I was very encouraged by some of the questions being asked by the justices, particularly of the team pro gerrymander. And if you need to get caught up on the legal wranglings over this gerrymandered map, you might find the next video helpful. And that's all I got. You guys stay safe out there, friends, and I will see you next time.